Hello and welcome to this episode of Focus On. My name is Zinati Goma. Today, we're at the Gauteng Hotel at the European House Ambrosetti CEO Dialogue on Southern Africa, where we will be getting a sense on how CEOs are viewing the African business landscape and how they are unlocking growth through instruments such as infrastructure financing.
This dialogue has become a strategic instrument of economic diplomacy, bringing together decision makers, institutional investors, policymakers, innovators, and entrepreneurs who share a conviction that Africa and Europe are natural partners in shaping the future global economic order. We gather at a moment of significant global uncertainty and transition. The 2025 G20 Global Inequality Report, recently tabled under the South Africa's presidency, underscores a sobering reality. 83% of countries are battling high inequality. The richest 1% absorbed 41% of all new wealth over the last 2 decades. Labor income shares continues to decline. Public trust in global institutions is eroding. And in many developing economies, inequality is now a structural constraint on growth. This is not merely an ethical issue. It is a profound economic and geopolitical risk. This is not a moral concern alone. It is a determinant of investment stability, political legitimacy, and long-term global growth, because societies marked by exclusion cannot sustain investment. Economies that cannot distribute opportunities cannot retain talent, and markets without social resilience cannot anchor capital. At the same time, global supply chains are being rewritten. Energy transitions are accelerating. Digital technologies are redefining competitiveness, and geopolitical realignments are altering the geography of production. For regions like Gauteng that are industrial, youthful, connected, and reform-orientated, this turbulence presents an opening to repositioning ourselves at the center of Africa's next economic frontier. Africa today stands at the threshold of a historic economic transformation. According to leading economic analysis, 9 of the world 20 fastest growing economies in 2025 are African. And these include Senegal, Rwanda, Ethiopia, Tanzania, and Cote d'Ivoire. These economies are demonstrating not only resilience, but structural evolution, driven by aggressive investment in infrastructure and logistics corridors, the expansion of renewable and transitional energy platforms, rapid growth in fintech, digital public infrastructure, and telecoms, a shift towards diversified manufacturing and value-added exports, expanding industrial capabilities, and progressive macroeconomic reforms. But Africa's growth story will only reach its full potential if we deepen regional integration, harmonize regulatory frameworks, resolve logistics bottlenecks, and scale investment in cross-border infrastructure. With intra-African trade still at 15%, the AfCFTA remains the most powerful lever for structural transformation. But execution, not just aspiration, will determine its impact. Our view is clear. Africa is rising, but the pace and inclusivity of this rise will depend on the quality of partnerships, the depth of regional integration, and the ability to scale investment at speed.
Tembiso, thank you so much for joining us. Now, we are here to basically unlock growth in Africa, but also pathways in how to do that. And Gauteng is actually one of those pathways, right? So just talk to me about the importance of Gauteng in unlocking not just the economic growth of the country, but of the broader African continent.
Thank you very much for having me. I think the continent is a very important market and we call it a market because it is exactly that. If I can start with tourism this time around, if you look at our top 10 markets from a tourism point of view, those are coming from 7 of those markets are in the continent, both land and air markets. And I was quite happy to hear the Minister of Home Affairs talking about how they've eased now the regulatory around immigration and visas, because that is going to unlock a lot of growth, particularly in the continent. So for us, if you look at Gauteng Growth and Development Agency, we have woken up to the fact that for us to actually grow the economy, it starts with us in engaging the continent and see how we can actually partner with the continent in unlocking Africa's potential. Before we can always look at the Northern Hemisphere. So for us, what we're doing is that ahead of our investment conference in April, we have now started engaging a lot of African countries through their missions based in Pretoria. What we're doing there is we outlining what are some of the growth potential of projects that are ready for investors to come in. And what we're also doing is we're looking at what are the trading opportunities that we can have between South Africa, Gauteng in this instance, with various countries. I mean, quite recently we've had an engagement with the ambassador of Egypt, who's just been posted here in South Africa, and we're looking at what are some of the opportunities for small businesses. What are some of the opportunities for tourism? Because for them, tourism is one of the economic levers that they've just identified. So for us, it's all that, and what we've done from our side, we're taking the whole thing around investment facilitation quite seriously. We are, creating a high-touch one-stop shop, wherein investors, when they come in, at least we can leverage the relationship that we have with various, government, functionaries, both at national and local government, for either, approvals of, permits, whether it's EIA, whether it's, land use, and all of those things. So I think what the one-stop shop will do is it will ensure that it actually boosts investor confidence, because they don't have to go through those hurdles themselves. They don't have to knock on doors. Investors or one-stop shop and Gauteng Growth and Development Agency is there to actually open those doors. But also what we're looking at is how do we ensure that we encourage some of the investors that are already in our destination to expand. And those expansion projects, because we know with expansion come a lot of jobs. We are a province with high unemployment rates, so these investments and some of these projects really assist us to create those employments, particularly in our townships, in our 5 corridors and those townships.
And it's quite interesting because you talk about, facilitating these relationships with Africa and trade. The common narrative is that Africa is risk. But do you see opportunity?
I think there's great opportunity. Is it not interesting that if you now talk about issues of sustainability, a lot of minerals are found in Africa, and yet we in the continent we suffer a lot in terms of energy, security. There's a whole issue around food security within the continent, and we've got endowments, we've got land, but these things and these challenges are facing the continent. Therefore, you've got to ask yourself, what is it that we're not doing? What is it that we're not seeing? And how do we then unlock these opportunities? And what are the enabling factors? So things like yesterday I had one of the panelists was saying, look, you can't talk about growth and yet you have not addressed issues around common policies within the continent, monetary policies, like the EU has done. And so it's those things where we have to look at institutions such as the AU. We've got to look at the Africa Continental Free Trade Area and say, how do we accelerate that so that we know exactly what is it that we need to do to unlock some of these opportunities. I don't see a risk. And if we ourselves as Africans or African countries, we can actually do that and really look at how do we then start creating data sets that will tell a different story rather than waiting for someone else to come and say, oh, there's risk, here's the data set that tells us that there is, there are risks in investing in the continent. So we really need to be quite serious about owning our data as well, because we know that when we own that data, we create a different narrative altogether about the possibilities, in the continent.
And just quickly, because you talk about enablers, is regulation and policy one of those, and how do you navigate that?
Absolutely. So regulations, policy, infrastructure as well. One of the panelists was talking about why are we not building rail? At some point from Zambia to Port Elizabeth, there was rail. So those are some of the things that we need to start looking at. The infrastructure, whether it's road, infrastructure, whether it's air access, where we actually now open up a lot of African airlines to fly within the continent so that there's speed in doing business, there's ease of people movement, because we know that people move and goods, actually follow. So policy, regulatory are some of those risks that people are talking about. And especially a lot of panelists today from the private sector, they were saying, look, we would want to come and invest in Africa, but it's just so difficult. The regulatory barriers are just too much. And I suppose what they're looking for is we want some level of certainty around the regulations. They're not saying everything should be smooth, everything should be 100%, but at least there must be, communication around those regulations and implementation and consistency in how they get implemented across the board. Yeah.
And that brings us to the end of this episode of Focus On, where we delved into the opportunities that CEOs are seeing across the African continent. From me and the team, it's goodbye for now.